So we are here today with Dr. Hansen in our postdoc interview. So to start off, can you tell us your name, your educational background, where you started, and how you ended up at The Ohio State University?
Okay, it's a long story, but I'll give it a try.
We have time.
Yeah, my name is Niels Hansen. I'm originally from Denmark, and I arrived here to Ohio State in September 2016. So
Oh,
I've been here about
relatively recent.
a year and a half by now. Um, I did my undergraduate studies at the Royal Academy of Music in Aarhus, Aalborg in Denmark, where I studied classical piano.
Okay.
So I started out as a performer, and then afterwards I did a Master of Music in Music Theory, the same place, and that gave me a chance to spend 1 year as an exchange student in Amsterdam, where I did a lot of courses in like ethnomusicology and music cognition and various other things at the University and Conservatory of Amsterdam. And then after that, I went to London and lived there for 2 years. Completed a Master of Science in Music, Mind and Brain at Goldsmiths College, which at that point was one of the only, maybe the only place in the world where you could do like a master's degree in like music psychology, with sort of a neuroscience perspective on things.
It is a very unique field, definitely.
Yeah. So we were a very international and diverse sort of cohort of people with all kinds of different backgrounds, and it's interesting to go to conferences and see all the same people that I did my masters with back then. I think something like 85% of us did a PhD afterwards. So,
wow.
So it was very oriented towards people who want a career in academia. So I completed that program and then stayed for another year working as a research assistant part-time at one of the universities, Queen Mary University
in London.
In London,
okay.
Yeah. It had like a center for digital music. So where I continued doing my research, and then at the same time I got a job as an organist in the Danish church. Sundays I would play the organ, and then during the week I would do research. So that gave me like an opportunity to stay in London, and I had a place to stay and things like that. So and then after that I went back to Denmark and completed a PhD, in music, but and at the end of the day I was based at a neuroimaging center. So I did one sort of brain scan experiment, and then I did some like behavioral experiments looking at musical expertise. So how does listening to music, specializing in music, playing and practicing on your musical instrument, how does this change the way that you process music, and essentially how does it change your brain?
You had a TED Talk about that too, right? Where you talked about the, I believe, 5 components of musical expertise genius. Yeah.
We tend to have sort of a romanticized concepts of musical genius.
Yes, definitely. With the genius we have had, Beethoven and Mozart and whatnot, it seems that it's an innate quality.
Yeah, that sort of seems to be sort of the undercurrent all the way. And of course, there are some innate aspects of musical expertise, and like you have a lot of DNA research now that shows that actually, there is a strong component of I mean, you can sort of inherit a certain disposition, not necessarily, I mean, to be musical as per se, but more like you have a disposition to practice a lot, and then that
kind of that behavior part
of it. That behavior then in turn leads to you being very 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 skilled.
Yes.
But I guess even people like Mozart and Beethoven and so on, they actually did study, quite intensely from a very early age. So for me, it's fine to say that there are musical geniuses, but but of course, they also had to work for it. And of course, as time has passed, they've become more and more sort of mythical. That's sort of what tends to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we do research nowadays, it's nice to approach these things from a scientific angle and say, okay, wait, which of these kind of myths do we actually have
Yes, exactly.
empirical evidence for? So that's what I've been doing in my PhD research.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started I started a 1 year postdoc there at the Center for Music in the Brain in Aarhus, Denmark. And then, but I also applied to a job here because my, one of my biggest idols in the research world advertised a postdoc position here. Also,
and now you're here.
And now I'm here. Yeah.
Yes. So can you describe this a little bit? What has your experience been like at the Ohio State University as a postdoc?
Yeah. So I'm a postdoc in the Cognitive and Systematic Musicology Laboratory,
Mm-hmm.
which is hidden in a building called Mershon Auditorium, and it's part of School of Music, but we're sort of hidden in the back stage area
Mm-hmm.
with no windows or anything like that. So like it's in that sense it's like it might be like a scary place. But
yes.
then when you walk in, and I remember this from my first day, I was told to walk in through the red door and find the elevator and knock on the door or whatever. And of course, I mean it did feel like I was walking into a deep
unknown kind
deep
of
unknown.
unknown.
But
yes.
then when you get in there, our lab is very sort of nicely decorated,
Mm-hmm.
and people obviously spend a lot of time there, and there was a very nice welcoming atmosphere. Yeah. So a sense of sort of working together, working jointly on some. Of course, everyone has their own
yes,
individual projects, but like you're sort of following along in what other people are doing. I think that's something that's very
mm-hmm.
important. So I guess my experience as a postdoc at OSU, I mean, I'm the only postdoc I know of in all of the arts and humanities. Of course, there are other
mm-hmm.
people, but I'm definitely the only postdoc at the School of Music. So I guess my daily sort of colleagues are like graduate students typically mm-hmm. in our lab. Who of course I help out with things and supervise, but I'm also just a colleague in many ways. I mean, they know more about many of the topics that they're studying than I do. Of course, I might have some experience. What does it take mm-hmm. to write a long dissertation and
yes, of course.
finish your PhD and things like that. And I'm trying to sort of contribute with that as mm-hmm. much as I can. But in a way, we're all sort of on the same level. So I don't really have that many postdoc colleagues. I'm afraid to say.
Yes, so definitely a stark difference from going to school in Denmark versus here, where you probably had a lot more colleagues to kind of cooperate and work with.
Yeah, I was based at a big research center there that got a big mm-hmm. Grant. So yeah, that's been expanding a lot.
And can you describe to us a little bit more about what exactly it is that you do, what you research?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's sort of two ways of answering that question mm-hmm. in a way, at least two ways. So I mean, one is this sort of overall, what are we as a research community trying to achieve?
Yes.
And the other one is like, what are my specific projects right now? And I could of course talk about my specific projects, but at the end of the day, they're actually going in all kinds of different directions. So it would be really yes. hard for me to say this is my mm-hmm. specialty. I felt pretty specialized when I finished my PhD, but now since then I've been spreading in all kinds of different directions. So if I start with the first kind of mm-hmm. solution or the first kind of answer to your question, I guess as a research community, we're trying to sort of answer the big questions about why do we have music at all.
Yes.
Because I mean, we know more or less why we have language. For instance, it allows us to communicate yes. and collaborate and things like that. Of course, you're better off if you have language, so that makes complete sense.
Yes.
that evolved at some point during human evolution. When it comes to music, on the other hand, music is at least as old as language. I mean, we have we have found, old bone flutes from like 40,000 years ago, but beyond that, we don't really know. But presumably humans would have been sizing, at least hitting things, beating
Yes.
rhythms. It's very likely that maybe music even predated language. It's also what some people would say. So we have music, and it has, it has, if it was completely useless, it would probably have disappeared
Exactly. So
in
why has it
evolution. So
stayed?
yeah, and I mean, I know as a musician that it requires tens of thousands of hours, practicing a musical instrument before you
Yes.
become a professional. So like I could have spent all those hours collecting berries, or like going hunting. Why is that a useful thing to do? So and I mean, to answer, I don't really have an answer to that question, but I mean, there are different theories out there, and I mean, one of them is that music has a um, is able to sort of create social cohesion in groups. So like if you go to a big sports game, you
Yes.
you might like sing before you start, and you might sing during the game. You might have some songs associated with your team that sort of, when you sing those songs, you feel like a group.
As with our football games here.
Exactly.
Yes.
I mean, there's a reason why the music is sort of before the game begins. You want to set the atmosphere up, and you
Mm-hmm.
want people to feel a sense of community. That's of course like a happy occasion, but we also
Yes.
use music for funerals, for
Mm-hmm.
instance. I mean, it's almost unthinkable to imagine a funeral without
Without some music.
some kind of
Yes.
music. And if you look at different cultures all around the world, I mean, music is always involved in funerals, weddings,
In
important.
cultural settings too, in
Yeah,
tribes and
yeah,
traditions and whatnot. Yes.
yeah. And I mean, of course, when we sing together or listen together to a piece of music at a funeral, well, you know we 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 get a sense that we are not alone with our grief. You know,
Yes.
so I think this is one of the key things about why we have music. But I mean, there are also other things. I mean, making music also just feels good. Synchronizing or dancing, tapping along, like
Mm-hmm.
we all do it. As I argue in my TED talk, we are all musical beings in some kind of way. So even though you haven't studied the piano for like tens of thousands of hours, you're still musical, and you still probably like listen to music
Yes.
in your everyday life. And I think many people listen to many, like non-musicians, listen to music much more than I do, because for me, when I listen to music,
Mm-hmm.
it very easily gets distracting, or
Well, you see students definitely in today's modern day age just walking around campus with headphones in, and a lot of them are listening to music or doing tasks and having music in the background as
mhm.
it kind of provides an escape.
Yeah, and this is interesting because this is exactly opposite to what I said before.
Yeah.
So I said music binds us together, and we
Mm-hmm.
we make music together, we listen to music together. But actually, I mean, people also listen to music alone a
Yes.
lot. And so I mean, so what's the reason for that? Well, I think ultimately there are lots of different reasons why we have music, and I
Mm-hmm.
mean, one of them is the social cohesion one, probably. I mean, another one what might be that like you want to set yourself in the right kind of mood. So
Yes.
for instance, if you've experienced something traumatic, for
Mm-hmm.
instance, you might decide to listen to sad music. And I mean, when you think about it, why would you ever listen to sad? Why would you listen to something that makes you sad? I mean, why do you want to be more sad than you already are? But then when you start thinking a bit more about it, actually sadness is one of the things. It also serves a function like all other
Mm-hmm.
human emotions. I believe, and one of those functions is to make us ruminate, make us reconsider important life decisions, for instance. So
Yes.
so if you experience something traumatic, you might listen to sad music, and that might get you thinking about, okay, what could I do to avoid this, prevent this from happening in the
Mm-hmm.
future.
Well, yes, to add to that, I'm not necessarily sure how much the scientific basis there is on this, but people have said, well, the students or people who have some sort of musical background perform better in school or in mathematics.
So I mean, and this is a long
Yes.
discussion, and it's not over yet.
Definitely not.
We don't have the final answer to this. So sometimes we talk about transfer effects. So like if you study music, how is that gonna influence your performance in another domain like mathematics or language, for instance? And I mean there are some ways in which, for instance, I think there's some evidence, for instance, that musicians might be better at sort of decoding emotional prosody, so sort of like the melody, the pitch movements of your voice, which says a lot about what your emotion is and things like that. But I mean, generally, very few of these studies sort of show that studying music is better than, like, if you want to improve mathematics, the best thing you can do is study mathematics.
Practice, yes, in the field.
Essentially, like music is not some kind of like
definitely not, yes,
wonder cure to these kinds of things. But of course, I mean, there might be some transfer effects, and you talked about like a pianist might play play different things with their different hands, and so and as you might know, we would typically use our sort of left part of the brain to sort of control our right hand, and vice versa. So when you're coordinating and like independently controlling the two hands, there's some evidence actually, if you do structural brain scans on musicians, you'll see that they have on average a slightly larger corpus callosum, which is the structure that connects the two
hemispheres together.
Two hemispheres, yeah. Then what is the practical significance of that? Is that an advantage?
And that leads to another question.
Like it's hard to know, but there's definitely different types of evidence that like musical training changes the very structures of your brains.
Yes.
And also changes the functional networks in your brain and so on. And then, I mean, whether that's a good or bad thing probably depends on what I'm sure you become a better pianist by playing the piano, but you don't necessarily become a better mathematician from playing the piano.
Yes.
So, yeah. So the answer is probably maybe.
Maybe,
or
yes.
Partly, or sometimes, or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so could you explain a little bit more then, what would a typical day in your life look like in terms of you go into the lab, you're getting ready to work on something today? What might that be like?
Yeah, I mean, that varies a lot, I guess. But usually I would get up in the morning, I would have my breakfast, and I would...
most essential part of the day.
Yes, that's very important for me. I can't do anything until I've had my breakfast. And with breakfast, I would typically, start looking at my emails and sort of getting getting things out of the way, sort of to begin the day. And then when I'm done with that, I would go into a lab. And then some days I have meetings. I have meetings with the professor that I'm working with, for instance. I have sometimes meetings with the other students. Sometimes other commitments. So, and then of course sometimes we run experiments. So in our lab we have two sound attenuated booths. So like essentially like a small room where you can place your participants, and then they'll be typically listening to musical sounds and completing some kind of task. So that's sort of the typical kind of setup.
Could you discuss one of those experiments or something that you found was your favorite experiment that you have conducted or done, or kind of your favorite part of your research so far?
Yeah, I mean it's hard to like pick out one favorite, but I'll mention something that was a bit sort of like a special project that we've been running since I arrived. It's actually a project I took over from the previous postdoc, and then I've been finalizing the experiment and running the actual experiment, recruiting participants. So it's a motion capture study. So that means that motion capture is what you use, for instance, in film or animation to you've probably seen pictures of these, or like videos with people dressed in these suits, cameras all around you that pick up the markers, and then you can sort of like reconstruct the movements of a person. And of course you can also do that with musicians playing on their instruments. So we did a study with violin and viola duos. So an experiment where people come into the lab and dress up in these suits, and then they play small like duet pieces. So and then we would try to disturb them in different ways while they're playing, for instance, by adding white noise, so they'll be hearing themselves and the other person through headphones, and by adding white noise, we are making it harder for them to synchronize with each other.
Yes.
And we might also ask them to, like, turn around so they're not looking at each other anymore, and so on. So we are trying to sort of like obstruct their performance in different ways and see how that influences their ability to play together with each other.
So essentially, you were kind of investigating into people playing together and synchronizing, and then kind of putting in those variables to see how that changes.
Yeah. So for instance, if you distort people's the auditory components, so like
Yes.
what people can hear, are they more likely to rely on visual cues? And if you take away the visual cues by asking people to turn around, are they then more likely to rely on the auditory
Kind of what
cues?
compensates for that.
Yeah, compensation, and like how does musical expertise affect those things?
And so I have a couple questions aside from research. A little bit more about yourself. So you mentioned do you only play piano, or are there other instruments that you've kind of gone to explore?
Yeah, so I trained as a classical pianist,
Yes.
and I've also always played the organ, like church organ,
Yes.
because it's a good way of earning a bit of extra money. But in addition to that, I also play in a Javanese gamelan ensemble. So
What exactly is that?
so in Indonesia, so like islands like Java and Bali,
Yes.
and so on, they have these musical traditions where you have a so-called like a gamelan ensemble, and that means you have instruments like different big gongs and like different like metallophones, and that metallophone like instruments that people
Yes.
are playing, and like different kettle drums and things like that. And what fascinated, and then of course the music sounds completely different from what we're used to, and that's one of the things that fascinated me the most as a musician, but also as like a cognitive scientist, because I remember my first encounters with this musical tradition. Like I had no idea where, listening to the music and trying to play along, I had no idea where I was.
Yes.
Everything that was like strong beats in my music was weak beats in this music, and vice versa. So it was sort of like being thrown into something completely different. The scales are different. The instruments are tuned in completely different ways. The structure of the music is very different, and the sounds are very different. So for me, it was also sort of like an exercise in how can you acquire a new musical style? How long
Yes.
how can you sort of and I think that's then like playing the instruments is an important part, because even when we listen to music, we are also, at least as musicians, sort of imagining ourselves playing music. So if you for instance play like piano music to me, you would see activation in my motor cortex, even though I'm just listening. So the parts of the brain that we use to play music are also activated when we listen to music, for instance. So like listening to music is sort of like an is sort of an embodied kind of experience in a way.
Yes, definitely.
So like I feel like I have a much better understanding of that music now from having played it myself. This is something that I would like to incorporate in my research at some point.
To add to that, what exactly made you pursue music? Made you go into this long course of study in music theory, neuro, and cognition?
Yeah. I mean, it's been a gradual process. I mean, what started out as the driving force, I remember like my parents like bought this like very crappy keyboard, and within the first day I had already learned a couple of songs. I was very
Yes.
excited about this, and then started doing piano lessons. And I think like the driving force back then was, you found something that you were good at doing, and people were saying, you have talent for this.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course, like the incentive to get better and better and better at it, um, was sort of, like, driving me into applying for the conservatory and being accepted there and so on. And then you sort of, when you're there, you sort of realize, oh, I'm actually, I'm training to become a pianist, but it's also essentially what you're gonna do when you finish is also like teach the piano. And that's when
Yes.
I realized, I had the best possible teacher, in like piano pedagogics, but I just
Mm-hmm.
couldn't see myself teach the piano like full
So you
time.
decided to
So
explore
I
different.
decided to move in a more sort of academic direction, and that led me to like music theory first, as sort of a humanities discipline, you can
Mm-hmm.
say, and then it became more and more empirical, and computational, and then eventually neuroscientific. So it's been sort of a general development from like performance and pedagogics to
Mm-hmm.
like music theory and music cognition and neuroscience.
Kind of another question I think is important. What motivates you to do this research kind of every day? What is your passion?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think it's a combination of things, but like, ultimately, I want to know the answer to these questions. So, like, why do we have music? And
Mm-hmm.
I want to understand, what music is, and what it does to us. That's sort of the motivating, force on the long term. But of course, like in your everyday life, you also need sort of smaller incentives. Like I want to finish this paper. I want
Yes.
I want to get another publication. I want to connect with these professional colleagues. I want to go to that conference. I want to, so like you have
Mm-hmm.
sort of smaller steps also that you find motivating. And for me, I enjoy being part of like an international community. I like going to the conferences and like meeting,
Yes.
seeing people again, and seeing how their work is developing and so on, and seeing how, I'm becoming more and more sort of a part of that, and like my contribution sort of becomes more and more useful and important in a
Yes,
way.
of
So,
course.
and so that's also interesting, to feel that you have sort of friends and colleagues all around the world,
To collaborate with
interested
kind of
in
and
similar things and for collaborating and so on. Yeah.
okay. And then kind of last question to finish it off. So we kind of touched a little bit on this, but being here at Ohio State for a year now, did you say about
Year and a half.
a year and a half?
Yeah.
What has been your favorite part of being here for that time period at Ohio State?
At Ohio State,
Yes.
I mean, I don't really feel able to say much about like Ohio State as a general thing,
Mm-hmm.
because I think it's a very, very large
It is a
university,
very
and
large
there are
university.
lots of
Yes.
departments and lots of labs who all have different advantages and disadvantages. One of the things in my own little lab that
Mm-hmm.
I really liked is, as I said before, the sort of collaborative
Yes.
spirits, and like feeling supported by our mentor is very important, because and that's something that I will take away as well. If I am to establish a lab in the future, I will do many of the same things that my mentor here is doing now. And that's also one of the reasons, I guess, when you finished your PhD, you sort of realize, okay, the next place I go, I should also think about like where can I get the support that I need, and like
Of course.
what kind of um, what kind of personality would be good for me to work with. And I know for myself now, I didn't know that previously, but like now I know more and more about that being able to collaborate is very.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time,
Yeah.
Dr. Hansen. It was great talking to you. And that concludes our postdoc spotlight interview for today. We hope you enjoyed, and we hope you tune in to the next spotlight interview. See you then.